Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohon, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast is made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Welcome, everybody, to Driving the Line. We are the podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. And I am Mike Bohon, your co-host today. And I've got our fearless leader, Kenny Ray, on the other end here. And we've got a special guest with us today, Mr. Scott Dunwiddie, who is an expert in claims and claims handling. And I'll let him introduce himself here in just a minute and he can give a little bit of his background. But we've got a really good topic for you today, and it's something that I don't think that folks like to talk about too much, but it's something that we end up talking about a lot because, unfortunately, claims in the insurance world happen every day. You may not, as a trucking company, see a claim every day, but claims are happening every day. And there's a lot of nuances to this when we get into how trucking companies handle claims, how insurance companies handle claims, how this all works. There's a lot to it. So our goal today is to talk about how that works and how you can be successful going through this process if you're in the situation where you are involved in a claim. But before we get into that, Mr. Scott Dunwiddie, I want to give you just a second to introduce yourself, give you a little background. I know this is the first time you've been on the podcast, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I've been in insurance just a little over 25 years now. Can't believe it's been that long, but I guess it has. A little gray in my beard now. I started off, ended up going through school, thought I'd be an attorney at one point, went to law school, passed the bar, and they had a job for a claim adjuster at an insurance company back where I used to live, and went and interviewed for that. I had no idea what insurance jobs were, what they'd entail. It just sounded cool. So I ended up in insurance as a fidelity specialist, I think was my original title as a claim adjuster, which was employee dishonesty, theft, forgery, all sorts of cool types of claims. But from there, I did a whole bunch of different jobs on the insurance company side related to claims, underwriting, quality assurance, training. Moved over to the agency side after about 11 years, and I've been on the agency side ever since, more as a consultant risk manager. Been with Kleinwood, which is now Marsh McLennan, just a little over 9 years now.
That's awesome. And we're glad to have you as part of our team because I know we utilize your expertise quite a bit. I know there's a lot of times when I'm talking to a client or producer, and I said, well, we need to get Mr. Dunwiddie on this one because his expertise is far exceeds my own on this. So thank you for all you do for us, and thanks for joining us today. But one of the things I wanted to start with is, Kenny, I know in your background, you were at a pretty large trucking company in your past, and you can wear that safety director hat pretty well. And I kind of wanted to run down through what a trucking company that's listening to us right now might do when they get that call. And we all know what that call is. They get the call that we just had an accident, or we just had an incident, or we just had an injury. What are the steps that a trucking company needs to do when they get that call?
You know, Mike, and you started off by saying nobody likes dealing with claims, and they don't for two reasons. Number one, it means something bad's happened at your company, at the motor carrier. And second, then this whole process starts that Scott's going to flesh out for us that tends to be very frustrating a lot of times for trucking companies. And one of the things we're really wanting Scott to do is kind of, pull the curtain back and tell what goes on behind the scenes to maybe alleviate some of that frustration that some of these safety directors and owners of trucking companies experience when they're in the midst of this claim process. And Scott, I want to also reiterate what Mike said. Welcome to the podcast. It's our honor to have you. And we're tickled to death to have a claims specialist on here. So, Mike, let's pretend I'm sitting in the chair and I'm a safety director and my life's just going. I'm at work one day and everything's hunky dory, and then all of a sudden that quote unquote call it comes in, and it may be your driver that says, "Hey, boss, I've just had a crash. I'm so and so place and the truck's tore up." And or it may be an emergency room at a hospital calls and says one of your employees just came in an ambulance and apparently fell down in a parking lot and is complaining of hip pain or knee pain or whatever. Or it may be a driver that calls and says, "Hey, I stopped at a truck stop to get fuel and went in to get a bite to eat, and I came back and the back doors of the trailer have been ripped open and half our stuff's gone." I mean, it can be a variety of different things. But at some point, and first of all, we always, as safety, and I know, and Scott, you need to know this ahead of time. Many of our listeners are safety directors at trucking companies. And so, their initial response is my driver okay? Is anybody hurt? Are we dealing with a catastrophic scene, or is the road blocked? I mean, all of these thoughts run through your mind because half the time that driver's 1,000 miles from home and you can't put eyes on them, and he or she is shook up, particularly if it's a really serious crash, and you're trying to calm them down, ratchet them down, and figure out just kind of what's going on. But Mike, once you move past that initial crisis, that initial chaos, then the second quote unquote call takes place, and that's when you call that magic number on your insurance card and say, "We've had an incident." And at that point, you get some person on the other end and they're going to tell you, "Hey, here's your claim number." And that starts the process. And at this point, I want to punt back to you and Scott and say, "Okay, Scott, I've got a claim number. Now, what does that mean in my world as a safety director at a trucking company?"
Kenny, you kind of alluded to it. I mean, first, we're going to probably cover what happened, what type of accident. If it's a accident on the highway, of course you want to make sure, is everybody safe? Is there any follow-up that needs to be done with the police? Do you need to call your dispatcher? Make sure they know what happened. Take care of that side of it first. Depending on the type of loss, if the driver is injured, is there a ambulance on the way? Are they there? Are they getting checked out? Safety is obviously the first thing that we would look at, depending on the type of accident. But then, for sure, the next thing is we're putting it to insurance just as soon as possible. Timely reporting is, if not the most important thing, it's probably right up there because it affects everything else that happens after that. I think you mentioned a few different types of claims, but if you want to take, for example, the highway accident, so you're probably going to have, if it's a rollover, you got tow trucks there, you got maybe cargo going on, and in the trailer it needs to be addressed. Cargo, you're going to have somebody there just as soon as possible to take a look at it, see what's damaged, how it was damaged, is anything salvageable. If you can get a hold of the insurance company as soon as possible, they can potentially get a local inspector out to take a look at it, do an assessment, see what they can do right there on the spot. Get a hold of the shipper, if you need to let them know there's been an accident and see if they want to take the product back, move it. If you're dealing with a highway accident, we'll take it out of the cargo example, but just a regular highway accident, you're going to have probably multiple vehicles involved. You're probably going to have some claims of bodily injury. So it's really important to get that notice into the insurance company. So again, maybe they can get somebody out there, take some statements. They can walk you through the process. If you took some pictures of the accident scene, you guys know pictures is one of my things I think is one of the most important things, along with the dash cam. If you can download the dash cam, get pictures. A lot of times what we run into is word versus word, or Another driver goes home, maybe their memory is different later on after they start talking to people than it was at the scene. So all that stuff is going on and it can be hectic. So to try to remember to do all that, but calling it in right away is part of that process, and they can help walk the driver through that.
Yeah. Well, and I was gonna ask you. So a lot of times, and I've heard from insurance companies on this, and I've kind of heard conversations about this where the trucking company will get the call. Hey, we've had an accident, just like you were talking. We've had an accident out on the highway. We don't have a lot of details yet, but we know there were two vehicles involved or whatever. Does the trucking company need all the information from that crash before they call the insurance company, or how do you recommend that? Can they just call the insurance company and say, hey, we've had an incident. We're going to go ahead and report this now so you guys are aware of it, but we don't have a lot of details. As soon as we find out, we'll let you know more. Is that the best way to handle that?
That's actually a great question. I get that a lot. Yeah, go ahead and call the insurance company with the information that you have at the time, and they can go ahead and start getting the claim set up in their system, get it assigned to an adjuster, and the adjuster is going to follow up with you once they get the file and try to get the rest of that information. After you make the call to insurance, you may just keep gathering that information while you're on scene, so you have it ready when the adjuster asks you about it.
Yeah, because you'd mentioned it may be if it's in another state, that from that trucking, the insurance company may send an independent adjuster, somebody on site, they may get somebody there to help in that process, depending on which insurance company you're with. So that's all things that are important things to consider when you're going through the insurance process and who you're actually getting your insurance from. But I think that the key point there of making sure that that claim is reported immediately or as soon as possible is just reiterated because as you said, Scott, there's so many things that can be affected from a late reported claim, all the way up to potential litigation down the road. I mean, it's like the sooner the insurance company and the people that are stakeholders in it are aware of what's going on, the better off you're going to be as a trucking company.
For sure.
So we go through that process. We've been notified we've had an accident as a trucking company. We notify the insurance company, and you kind of hit on some of this stuff that as you were talking through there. So how we're documenting this claim. So let's say maybe we have called it in. We've got our claim number, like Kenny was talking about. Maybe there's an adjuster sign, but we're gathering information. Maybe it's dash cam footage. Maybe it's those pictures you're talking about. But how do we really adequately document what's going on to support what our side of the story is when it comes to this claim? Because unfortunately, we all know that when something happens, if there's two parties involved, there's probably going to be two different stories, or there's not going to be one very similar story, I guess I would say. So how do we go about documenting that stuff? Because you'd hit on dash cameras, you hit on pictures. Talk about some of the things that maybe that a company would walk a driver through on site to document what's going on.
So to kind of backtrack a little bit, so when you call the claim in, if you're on site there, you're going to get the claims customer service department. Question I get asked a lot is, hey, when I call in, do I need to ask for a specific person? The answer is no. Typically, the insurance companies have several people available to take the calls as they come in. They're going to ask for kind of the basic details about, do you have your policy number? What's the name of your trucking company so they can pull up the information in their system. And then once they get it pulled up, they'll kind of have some of those basic questions that they'll walk you through. It's kind of the who, what, where, why, how questions. And they'll probably have a few follow-up questions for you, like, hey, did the police arrive on scene? Do you have a police number, case number that we can put in our file? And that's kind of the basic information that the claims customer service rep will obtain. And then they set up the claim. They'll give you a claim reference number before you get off the phone, so you can follow up if need be. But within typically 24 to 48 hours, it'll be assigned to a claim adjuster and that claim adjuster will reach out to the person that called the claim in. If it's the third party that called the claim in, they'll reach out to them and get their version. If it's the insured, they'll reach out to the insured first, but they're going to reach out to both sides within that 24 to 48 hour window. Try to get the information just as soon as possible. But, I think it's good, just risk management practice to have, within each company kind of the list of to-dos, if an accident happens and have some training going on. So, when it gets to that point, we've all seen it. It's chaotic, it's stressful, sometimes a little bit of shock going on. It's hard to remember that at the time, but if you've had some training on it, if you have a list, a short list, they're with you in the cab, and even if not, the claims rep will help walk you through some of that too. But witness statements, pictures, police report, dash cam footage, all those are kind of the key pieces, because if you don't have that stuff, then it just comes down to that, what does each person involved say? And it becomes a word versus word, which is very hard to prove your claim.
Yeah. And I think you make an extremely valid point of saying every company that's listening to us right now should have a process in place for this. Because you're right, it's hectic when this happens. It's stressful. It's chaotic. No two claims are the same. So set yourself up for success to make it maybe a little less stressful and have that process in place. Have multiple people trained on what to do when these calls come in. Who's contacting the insurance company, letting the drivers know who they're supposed to call and talk to. These are all things, as you said, Scott, that should be lined out. It should be a streamlined process. So when that, as Kenny said, that quote unquote call does come in, it's just we start on step one and the process starts. And as hectic as things get and as crazy as things get, and they will get that way, at least we know we're covering our bases. We're hitting all the points we need to hit. And I think that's a great point you're making, Scott. And I think everybody that's listening to us, you do well to heed that advice, because, as you said, it's really easy to miss stuff in the heat of the moment when things are just crazy, and make it easy on yourself. Two different areas that we look at, I guess, when we're looking at requirements for document retention, things like that, are what the driver's doing roadside, and then what the company's doing in-house. Whether it's if they're a big company and they got a claims department, or it's a safety department, or maybe it's just the owner, it's a smaller company. One of the things and I know you work with a lot of different claims folks and insurance companies, things like this, but not all insurance companies are created equal, right? So I'm assuming that everybody should have a process where you're gathering and documenting information, because if you are working with an insurance company that is very proactive and they're involved and things like that, it's going to make their job easier. But regardless of who you're insured with, the steps that you just talked about are good practice for everybody, right? I mean, they should have, if a claim comes in, whatever that process is, they should have their file, whether that's electronic or an old manila envelope or whatever. They should have that file for that claim where their documentation goes. That's just good practice for everybody, right?
For sure. Whether it's a digital file or an old school paper file, yeah, you're going to want to keep those records available where you can readily find them fairly easily. And even after you think maybe the claim's resolved, I would say continue to keep them, because as happens sometimes, a party may come out of the woodwork a year, 2 years later, and you want to make sure you still have that documentation from the time it happened.
Yeah, because if you don't have that a year later, if it's me, 2 months later, a week later, I'm not going to remember. I can't remember what's going on. So yeah, absolutely. Documentations is key. Now, one thing that I don't necessarily want to go too far down this rabbit trail, but I want to get your opinion on this. What do you think about the legal representation, the introduction of legal representation when it comes to a claim? I mean, does it, I know not all claims are equal. Not all claims obviously have another party involved, things like that. But when should companies think about maybe I need to get legal representation on this?
I think for the most part, it probably depends on the severity of the accident. Um, Typically, where we see our clients get their attorneys involved, if it's a really serious multi-vehicle accident where you have several potential bodily injury claims, fatalities. We see those unfortunately from time to time where the exposure and the complexity is a little bit greater than maybe just your typical highway accident with one other vehicle. Um, if it's what I would call a lower exposure claim where maybe you just had a little fender bender, the truck backed up and just bumped the fender of the car behind you, but there's no injuries that you're aware of. It's just a minor kind of physical damage claim. That's probably not a situation where, you're going to get the value out of hiring an attorney. But when you got those more severe claims where there's a lot going on, there's a lot of information that's going to need to be tracked. There might be the potential for a lawsuit, you know, knock on wood that doesn't happen, but especially in the case of severe injuries or fatalities, the likelihood of an attorney representing one of the other parties is pretty high.
Scott, Mike and I have both seen that a lot of times the claims that end up with you are the ones that are problematic. You don't just get the routine ones. You get the ones that just are all messed up. And you and Mike both, it was such an interesting conversation y'all were having about a company having a process. Well, for one to end up with you that's messed up means they either didn't have a process or the process failed. So, without naming any specific claims, because we don't want to identify anybody, we never do that on the podcast, but what are some of those events? What are some of the failures that take place that result in a claim ending up on your desk? How do you, what makes it become one of those problematic ones that you're asked to step in and take care of? What are some of those issues that cause them to be all messed up?
Well, I mean, I would say the majority of them, there's some aspect of fault on our client. Um, the driver did something they shouldn't have done, um, did something unsafe that puts the percentage of fault pretty high on our client. That can run the whole gamut of different things that they might have done. Some of them, we see typically on the police report when it comes in and we see the citations, but it could be, driving recklessly, too fast for conditions, blowing an intersection, a stop sign, illegal U-turns, which are all things just about with every client we have that they've probably been trained on as far as don't do these things, but it still happens, which, again, places fault on the driver and our client, the insured, which raises the exposure if you've got injuries or, some multi-vehicle property damage as well. So those are typically the ones that get routed over to me to try to take a look at what happened, try to get a sense from all the facts, kind of where this is going to go, what kind of things that they can discuss with the adjuster as far as next steps, things to be aware of, what the potential settlement range of the claim might be. If this is a claim that unfortunately might have to go over and above the limit on their primary policy, it might have to go into their excess policy, which again brings more eyes on the claim from the excess claim adjuster. And hopefully they've got an excess policy, but we do have insureds that don't have excess coverage, and if it gets settled potentially over the primary policy, that's possibly coming out of their own pocket.
Well, you're kind of hitting on some stuff there that Kenny and I don't really like to wade off into much. And you're talking about policies and excess policies and things like that. And we tell our clients all the time, we're not insurance guys, we're safety guys. And I know that in the role that you have, Scott, you know much more about that kind of stuff than we do. But in regards to the claims and how those are handled, when you get into claims, I hear this a lot, and I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about here. But there's always sometimes it's tough to get claims settled because there's always, as we talked about before, there's differing viewpoints from different parties. There's disagreements about maybe how much equipment's worth or who was responsible for the coverage, who had the liability, that kind of stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about how you go about, because I know I've seen you do this. I've seen you help clients do this and getting some of that stuff resolved. And one of the things I was thinking about, which I don't know how long ago it's been, but it was an example of two insurance companies fighting over whose responsibility it was. Well, it was an owner operator that was bobtailing under supposedly under personal conveyance. Was he at the direction of the motor carrier? Was he not? And he had an accident. He had a claim. So does the bobtail insurance cover it, or the non-trucking use insurance cover it? Does the auto liability from the carrier do they cover it? And they were having this argument. It's like, no, he was at the direction of the motor carrier. They have to cover it. Or no, he was under personal conveyance. He was not under dispatch. You know, his non-truck use insurance should cover it. How do you, I know you get involved in the middle of that stuff, but how do you walk clients through that process of helping them resolve issues like that of coverages of maybe they're not getting as much value out of a truck or a trailer that they thought they were going to get, or a salvage or something like that? How do you walk them through that?
So yeah, coverage issues is another big area. Coverage questions where maybe the coverage isn't quite so black and white. I get a lot of those as well. So I would say my process has a lot to do with how I was trained as a claim adjuster for years, and how I trained other claim adjusters. You know, if I have access to the claim file notes online, you know, I like to go through the whole claim file because, as I think you had kind of mentioned before, every claim is unique. One fact could change the whole analysis. Um, in fact, when I first started working in claims, I had a couple good mentors, Larry and David, if you're listening out there, but um, they had been in the business for many years, and I was a young guy right out of law school, thought I knew how to handle each one that came in, and so I'd go over and say, hey, I think, you know, it's this. And each one of them would force me to open up the policy book, look at the language, walk through each fact, um, and make sure I was going through that process, because that's really what you have to do. And that is really part of my process. I'll look and see what the notes say, what the adjuster's thoughts are, because those are typically in the notes too. And then I like to talk to our insured. Might be multiple people at the insured to get the whole scope of what happened and try to kind of mesh all that together to get what might be what you would call the right version of events. And then take that, look at the coverages, try to figure out from the language in the coverages, do we have it under the right coverage? Like you said, is this a owner-op policy? Is this a commercial vehicle policy? Are we looking at the right coverage first? Then, okay, if we're under that coverage, what does the policy wording say? You know, does that fact scenario look like it's something that's going to be covered? Are there coverage issues that we need to talk about? Make sure the insured's aware of that. A lot of times the adjusters already run through that with the insured, our client, but if not, you know, it's something they should be aware of early on, so we have a chance to walk through it and figure out, is there other information, other documentation they can provide to try to help resolve that coverage issue.
What are like in what you see? What are some of the bigger coverage issues that you see? Because I know I read something the other day, and I don't even remember what it was in, but it was talking about drivers not added to policies, equipment not added to policies, so and it's involved in an accident and it's not covered, things like that. But from kind of day in, day out, what you see, what are some of the bigger coverage issues?
So typically anything that might be listed in the exclusions, no matter what the
Okay.
policy is. If I had to make one big suggestion, as far as reading policies, it would be take a look at the exclusions when you get your policy. I mean, rightly or wrongly, I think most of us have the expectation if we buy a policy that whatever happens is going to be covered. But unfortunately, it's not the case. So there are going to be things that aren't going to be covered, and if you read through the exclusions early on once you get your policy, I think that kind of helps that particular insured, that client, have a better understanding before something happens and not have that expectation and then be upset, if the claim adjuster comes back and says, "Hey, we've got a coverage issue here."
And I think, well, kind of to, I guess, toot our own horn, that's what your agent is there to help with. Guys like you, then there are our producers and our account managers who are the best of the best. And I'm so thankful for what they do and how they help their clients and walk through some of this stuff, because I'm telling you, it's sometimes reading through that policy stuff is like it's like a foreign language. I mean, you really kind of got to know what you're talking about. And for experts like you and the folks that work in our office, it's a lot easier for them than maybe just somebody like me or somebody who's running a trucking company out there. So, well, Scott, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm not going to cut you off just yet because I'm going to give you an opportunity to share anything else that you want to. But I first want to ask Kenny, before we wrap up this episode, have you got any additional questions for Scott? Well, we've got him held captive on the podcast here.
No, no questions. Just deep gratitude for you being our guest today, and so thankful that you're on our staff taking care of our clients. And so thank you for being on the podcast.
Hey, my
Absolutely.
pleasure.
Scott, is there any closing words? I mean, it's fine if you don't have anything, but if there's anything you wanted to share as we're getting ready to wrap up here, the floor is yours.
So there was one other issue we've been seeing a lot more of lately, but it has to do with cargo claims,
Okay.
broken seals. We're seeing more and more of those. There's all sorts of different, what I would call schemes out there now. All sorts of bad actors, I think, that we're seeing in these cargo claims. And the things that we touched on earlier are super important when it comes to those kinds of claims. It might not be things that our clients are doing currently, as far as taking pictures before they leave the dock to make sure that the seal's still intact, taking pictures of the cargo inside the trailer before they shut it, see what condition it's in, how it's braced, because what we're seeing a lot of times is they get to their final destination and the person, the owner, there at that business looks at it and says, "Hey, the seal's broken. We're not going to accept it." So then, you're kind of going back and trying to figure out, all right, what happened? Where did the seal get broken? Who did it? And if you haven't taken pictures, done the documentation along the way, scrutinized that bill of lading, all that's very important to try to be able to prove a claim like that, because the broken seal itself doesn't necessarily prove damages. And that's a big issue right now.
No, that's good information, and I've even seen stuff come in where even if law enforcement breaks a seal to do an inspection or something like that, it can sometimes become an issue. So I mean, there's just lots of ins and outs to that, and so I think that's good information that you're providing there, and it's definitely something our listeners need to think about. So. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. This has been awesome. The information you gave today was just extremely valuable. Hopefully, our listeners take the time and listen to this and maybe re-listen to it If they've got any questions, you guys out there listening to us, if there's anything that we talked about today that maybe made you think of a question, or you wanted some clarification on something, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be glad to answer some additional questions for you. I know this is just when we're doing these podcasts, it's just a limited time and we can't cover everything. But if there's something you got a question on, feel free to reach out to us, because we know that if you're thinking about something you got a question on, there's probably some other folks out there that have the same question, and maybe we'll revisit this at some point. I know we're kind of kicking around another idea where we may have Scott back and discuss some more topics about claims and different types of claims, and maybe go down this trail of cargo claims a little bit further. So, but for today, I think this is a good place to end. And again, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. As always, Kenny, thanks for being my partner on this one. Always good to see you, brother. And Amanda and Aaron are always with us, and we're grateful for you too as well. So to all of our listeners, thanks for joining us today. Please come back next time. We always love to have you right here on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.